If you're spread out, come a little closer. We'll keep each other warm and chase away the fears. Well, the last career in medicine was not to be. We were too poor to afford the learning. Besides, medicine was for the dandies and the aristocrats, not for the commonality. Instead, the good Lord blessed me with a hearty pair of hands, and I went to work for the Baltimore Brickworks, and from there I took a job with a building construction firm of Towson and Mosher. And it was in 1811 that we started work on an odd building, Davidge Hall. It was the first building in the new University of Maryland Medical School, and as I say, it is an odd building. Two rounded domes built one atop the other with no visible means of support. The bottom theatre was Chemical Hall, the top theatre Anatomical Hall. Well, as we were building, many of the state's finest physicians were milling about observing the construction, and I became acquainted with one of them, Dr. Nathan Reno Smith. He treated a broken toe I got when a brick fell off a scaffold. Well, as the construction progressed, I became curious to see about an unusual spiral staircase in the rear of the hall. It led to a hidden entrance. I thought it was a secret escape route in case the British attacked at the front portal. Having struck up somewhat of a friendship with Smith, I asked him about it. And he looked at me and said, No, Frank. There are enemies on our own shores from whom we have to protect ourselves. Then he said, Frank, why don't you come with me? We'll have some supper and drinks. Since he agreed to pay, I agreed to go. No type of relationship we had, see. Well, once there, Smith started talking in generous detail about the medical profession. He said, Frank, on the one hand, the law insists that a surgeon have the skills necessary to practice their vocation. But the only way of achieving these skills is through dissection, which itself is a crime, punishable by law. Well, I finished my beer and I said in a nice, loud, booming voice, the law's an ass. I think he liked that. But then he leaned forward. He got a queer look on his face. I thought he had gas. But it wasn't. He started to talk, but just then some people passed by our table. He clammed up, waited till they were gone. Then he asked me, what he wanted to ask me all along, would I be their resurrection man? Well, I like the sound of resurrection man. If he would have said, Frank, I want you to dig up some corpses, I don't know if I would have said yes so readily, but I've always had a poetic nature, and that had a nice ring to it. And it was a profitable occupation. $5 for a large, 2 and 2 bits for a small. Well, by October 1812, Davidge Hall was open. Now, in the gloomy spaces beneath the risers were my quarters and the quarters of a young medical student named Fettes. Fettes went with me on my first night raid. It was a cool and foggy October evening. Me and Fettes, we snuck out of that secret entrance. We headed 2 blocks north. Right here. The old Western burial ground. Of course, that time wasn't a church or building here at all. It was just an open boneyard. Well, there we were, me and Fettes, with just our fish oil lanterns to cast a dull glow. We found the grave in question. An old woman who died the day before. Well, the digging was much easier than I had anticipated, since the grave had recently been dug. Earth was still loose. At a depth of about 5 or 6 feet, we heard a sound that was to become music to my ears. Well, at this point we paused, we wiped our brows, contemplated the rest of our labor, and it was in fact at this point that I realized, well, we had wasted much time in unearthing the entire grave, and time was an important factor, you see. With my mattock, I could easily just open up a hole at the top, break through with the mattock, through the coffin liner and lid, you see. And then, well, simply with my meat hook. It's difficult to explain, really. I think you had to be there. But perhaps we could do a bit of a demonstration. Can I have a volunteer, please? Young lady, you look like a volunteer. Come right up here.
Oh my.
All right, come right up. There you go. Watch your step. Don't worry, never lost a patient yet. There we go. So you'll play the cadaver, I'll be Frank, and the meat hook will portray itself. Well, as I say, I would open up a hole at the head of the grave, I would tie a rope around the meat hook, and I would just lower it down into the grave. Oh, they never moved. No. I would have been out of there in a flash if they had moved. It's kind of like fishing, you see, but with dead fish. By the way, everyone, would you please just reach back here? You feel right here. This little indentation? Yes, well, that's pay dirt. So, I would tie the rope around, I'd lower it down, and Fetties would wait for me to get it centered. You see, I wanted to make sure it wasn't too much to one side or the other. Get it right there in the center. And then Fetties would give me a good strong count of 1, 2. He always took a pause, you see. He liked suspense. So I took a long pause between 2 and 3. And then he would go again, where were we? Oh yes, 2 and 3, and pull that corpse right out of the grave, doing much less damage than one would anticipate. Thank you for being a very brave cadaver. Well, this of course what I did later, but I hadn't discovered that trick yet. So, we broke open the coffin, rooted the dead woman out, and in my haste, I am embarrassed to admit, I stepped on the corpse's arm by accident. And a loosened bit of flesh just peeled right off. Slipping on that dead skin, I fell backwards in the grave, hit my head on my spade. My first night raid, I nearly became a subject myself. Well, we staunched my wound, took the woman, inserted her into a dripping sack, very descriptive name. Then we refilled the grave and headed back to Davidge Hall. There, Fetties paid me my price, made his entry in his day book, and later that morning, the fruit of our labors was subjected to further indignities in front of a class of gaping medical school students. Such was the beginning of my new career. At least once a week, often even more, I raided the Baltimore Boneyard. By and large, these raids were performed without incident. And my graveside manner improved to the point that I could be in and out within a half an hour. This was not an easy feat to accomplish. You see, in addition to being quick, I also had to be careful. If the vigilante mob thought that a grave had been robbed, things would get very difficult for the doctors, the students, and myself. There were certain unscrupulous types, if they couldn't find subjects, they would create them. Oh yes, indeed, they would. They'd go down to the harbor's edge or poke around in alleyways looking for derelicts or prostitutes, and if they came across a grave watch, somebody who'd been hired to guard the grave from the likes of me, well, they'd get him drunk with some brandy and then smash his skull with the blade of their shovel. Well, I want this to be widely known. I never resorted to murder. I always came by my bodies fairly. My line of work, if you were to be caught, pray to God the police catch you. They'd just take you to jail. The mob, they string you up on a lamppost, make a public demonstration of what good Christians they are. I know. Nearly happened to me. It was, in fact, my last night raid. See, the papers had been full of that Birkin hair story, so everybody here assumed the same sort of thing was going on. Mobs rioted at Davidge Hall. They even set fire right in the front there did some degree of damage, but, well, after a few days, it seemed like things calmed down enough that we could resume the nightly raids. I enlisted the service of a young medical student named Channing. Me and Channing, we snuck out of that secret entrance and we came right back here, the old Western burial ground, once again. We had no trouble finding the crypt in question, but as soon as we had lifted the front casement off, we heard voices. Now I heard one voice distinctly say, "Saw something over there!" Channing and I knew. We knew our only hope was to, climb inside the crypt, extinguish our lanterns, and close up the front casement. That's exactly what we did. That vigilante mob knew that we were somewhere in this boneyard. They were not going to leave. They kept going from crypt to crypt, shining their lanterns through the openings and the vents, trying to catch us. Well, the night wore on. We couldn't move for fear of making sound, giving away our location. My limbs became terribly cramped, but Channing, that lad suffered much worse. You see, I understand. Well, later they told me the word for it was claustrophobia. Well, without a word to me, he jumped up, he pushed open that front casement, he ran out. I had to follow. In a moment or two, there we were, standing in the cold night air, and a member of the watch said, "There they are!" Well, Channing and I, we ran. You see, we knew our only hope was to scale the wall, jump down to Green Street, get back to Davidge Hall, get some help. But upon landing in the street, Channing, he twisted his leg, his ankle there, and fell right to the ground. My first impulse was to help him, to go back, throw him over my shoulder like I'd done with so many corpses in the past. But as I turned, I could already feel the rocks whizzing past my ears. And I looked, I'll never forget, as long as I live, I'll never forget that look on his face. He yelled at me, "Run, Frank! Save yourself!" To my everlasting shame, that is exactly what I did. And I looked back only once. They were dragging Channing away. And they hung him right on the corner on the lamppost. Well, I kept running because, see, several men still followed me. I knew I had to get inside, but as soon as I went in that secret entrance, I revealed its location. My pursuers followed me in. Once inside, I started screaming my fool head off. But the hall was empty, save for a few partially dissected cadavers to offer me any assistance, so I decided to join them. I leapt onto a dissecting table, pulled a blood-stained cloth over my head, and I held my breath as one rioter after another ran past me. Well, at a certain point, the police, they cleared out those rioters. I don't know if it was the strain of the evening's events, but I fell asleep. I slept soundly, I did. I slept so soundly that I did not hear the students arrive in the morning to take their place. It was only as I heard Dr. Davidge begin to describe the able-bodied man he was about to dissect that I started to wake up. And I felt the cold steel of his scalpel penetrate my chest. Well, fully awake now, I pushed his hand away, but not before that scalpel punctured my lung. I felt air escaping from my body. I began to shake. I shook so violently for so long that it took me many minutes indeed, to realize that it was just Dr. Smith shaking and waking me from what was a nightmare. Unfortunately, what happened the night before was not a dream. Channing was dead. 22 years old. Dead. I told Davidge and Smith that that was to be my last night raid. I looked for new employment. Actually found a new job driving a hearse. It seemed only fair to take a few bodies back to the graveyard. Well, I can talk about these things now because, well, times have changed, haven't they? Dissections now are a normal, respected part of the teaching of medicine, but medicine itself has changed. It's risen out of the ancient practice of superstition, and now it's become science. So, the next time a doctor makes your fever go away or sets your broken bone, please don't forget all the people in the graveyard who gave so much of themselves. And don't forget the valuable contributions made to medicine by me, Frank, the Body Snatcher. Good day to you all!